Okay, so a couple of questions about the lab stuff. Let's deal with this first. Okay, so first question, nope, that's the wrong thing. It can be so hard to navigate this stuff when it's all open. Okay, so first question is difference between rectal mucosa and anal mucosa. Okay, so on this slide, we're looking literally at the junction between the rectum and the anus. So if you look at the large intestine slides first, then hopefully you can appreciate that on the left side, we have large intestinal mucosa. So I can see the pits from here. And then I know that the anus is going to transition into stratified squamous epithelium. Now that's not easy to see at this level of magnification, but I can see a difference in the mucosa right here. So this is our dividing line. And you'll notice that on our explanations, it talks about the pectinate line. If I click on that, it takes me over here, which is kind of helpful. But if I increase my magnification right here, this is literally the point where it's transitioning. So over here, we've got a bunch of pits with a ton of mucus cells, so a ton of goblet cells over here secreting mucus. And then these guys are columnar. I don't know if you can see that. Columnar, goblet cells. And right here, it goes, boop, slightly stratified. And now the squamous part of this is really hard to see. It's pretty thin. But what we can see is that there's definitely stratification here. And they're kind of goofy looking cells. And if we go just a little bit over, now we can start to see, okay, there is definitely 1 or 2 layers of squamous cells at the apical surface. And now this is starting to look a bit more like a proper stratified squamous epithelium. This is non-keratinized because I can see nuclei on the surface. And then, hold on, let me decrease the magnification a little bit for a second here. And then here is where we transition from non-keratinized to keratinized. So you can see some nuclei here. And then as you get over here, suddenly those are lost. See, so now we have layers of keratinized squamous. So we have 3 different types of mucosa on this slide because the rectum has 1 type and the anus has 2. And if you look over here, it does talk about that. It, of course, when you click on these guys, it's got, specific sections. So it's taking you to this overview. If you click on stratified squamous epithelium, on this side we have non-keratinized, and on this side we have keratinized. And you can see it quite nicely because that keratinized, it tends to have a separation. This happens when they make the slide. So there's all this space up here with these dead layers of cells. And this is much thicker than this is too. Let's see. What else
the rectal mucosa is which one? The one on the
both
left?
of this is rectal mucosa.
Okay.
So
and the one over here that you showed with the big goblet cells is
sorry, both of these is anal mucosa. Yes. So then this is rectal mucosa.
Okay.
Yeah. It basically, when there's goblet cells on this slide, it's rectum. When you lose the goblet cells, it's anus.
Goblet cells on the rectal side, okay. And that's where you have the stratified squamous cells and the keratinized over here. Okay. That makes sense.
And then they've got the sphincters on here. There's a bunch of other things on here, but that's what we're focusing on. What else did I put on there? Oh yeah, the sphincters. Because they do you click on that, it takes you out here. So this is skeletal muscle, mostly in cross-section. It's a little harder to appreciate in cross-section, but you can see the various large fibers with their peripheral nuclei. And then the internal anal sphincter is this thickened area of smooth muscle right here. Okay, so then the stomach slide. So for the stomach slide, yeah, I found that most of these slides honestly did not have serosa present. So even though it would be ideal to have all 4 layers, they don't. So we're not necessarily going to have any good serosa identified here. And that's okay. I mean, honestly, it's the least important layer when it comes to this stuff. 112. There were so many stomach options, it was hard to find one good one. Yeah, so there is no serosa. It would be down here. So remember when we talk about muscular layers, there is going to be a muscular layer to the epithelium. So there's a muscularis mucosa, and that's part of the mucosal layer. So this is not a whole layer, whereas the muscularis externa is the muscular layer. So when we talk about the 3 layers or when we talk about the 4 layers of the GI tract, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa, this is the one, this is the one that when we talk about muscularis layer. So this is longitudinal and this is circular. These are the 2 layers of smooth muscle of the muscular layer. And then this little muscularis mucosa guy is just the smooth muscle layer of the mucosa. So the mucosa has a couple different layers to it. Come on, sorry, zooming out is the hardest part. Come on, there we go. So there's the epithelium. This is all epithelium, right? This is stomach, so this is gastric glands. And then lamina propria in here, and then the muscularis mucosa. So this thin little layer is just to do with the texturing. This is like what makes it fold up into rugae and stuff like that. Whereas this muscularis externa is what's actually responsible for like all of the mechanical activity of the stomach. And there's actually an oblique layer in here too. I can't tell which one's which, but you don't need to know the layers, right? I didn't put it in there. Not that crazy. Yeah, no, just the layer. There should be 3 layers here, but it can be hard to appreciate. Looks like it's there, and maybe there. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All of this is smooth muscle of the muscularis layer of the stomach. Okay, let's see. All right, so that's muscle, liver, and pancreas. Okay, so the pancreas. So on the pancreas, okay, which one did I use? 232. 232. Oh yeah, I like the staining better on this one. Okay, so the vast majority of this slide is the acini of the exocrine pancreas. So it can almost be hard to see because it's almost everything. So when you look at these cells, like almost every single cell on here is an acinar cell, as in it's responsible for making the enzymes. And then these paler pink ones, these are part of the ducts. So basically everything on here is acinous except for these little pink bits, which are part of the ducts. And the size of that just varies. And then these islets, when you click on this islet and you can try to find more, then these guys, this is the endocrine pancreas. So these are the cells that are making insulin and glucagon. But everything else, all of these nice dark pinkish with the purplishy rimmy things, all of this is acinous, because that's almost everything that the pancreas is, and what the pancreas does is cells to make those digestive enzymes. So most of the cells that you can see here are acinar cells, and then these paler pink ones again are the duct cells. So they're the ones making like the secreting the bicarbonate and the watery portion of the pancreatic juice. And then this is an example of the endocrine. And so this is the most rare portion, can be a little hard to find sometimes. Hold on. I have more of that, just the one. No. If you haven't noticed, you can actually, all the different specific views they have set up over here, you can also just ask for, which is kind of cool. So there are definitely more of these guys. You can usually spot them, like, oh, there's one. So again, this part, this is a little cluster of endocrine cells. So see how they're lighter pink and have more of a uniform appearance? And then all of this darkery stuff, those are acinar cells again. And then the lighter pink scattered in between, that's duct. Okay, so that's kind of what you got. Those are your options in pancreas, which is why those are the three things that I picked for you to identify. And then for liver, okay, so for liver, we want to see the triads. Okay, so even when you look at it here, you can kind of see this vague texturing, right? So that vague texturing is the lobules, because that's what it's talking about here when it says the lighter areas. And when you zoom in on this, these smaller circles, most of these guys are going to be those central veins. Okay, and like here you can see the spacing, those are bile canaliculi running between all of these hepatocytes. So then when we go to the triads, we'll start with the one that it's actually pointing out to us. So we're going to have three different circular things, right, that we're trying to identify. The artery is always going to be the one with the thickest walls. And good God, this is just not great. Like how this is their example. There might not be great examples on here. Even though it's a really nice slide, like those are just some nice little plates of hepatocytes right here. You can see this is a nice small little blood vessel. See that? Those are individual little red blood cells right there. This looks like bile duct, but the artery and the vein are not well distinguished. You can just see three circles here, which means we're at a triad. So if we don't have good examples, then it's going to be hard for me to ask you to identify it. But let's see. So central vein, and there should ideally be 6 of them, but they don't always show up. So like here's another triad here, but it's not, definitely at a weird angle there because we caught a longitudinal cut of, I think that's the vein. So we might not have some great examples. Let's go back out. Okay, they do have 3 of them. Let's see if one or the other one. I mean, that's a vein, that's the artery. Not really clear on which bit's the bile duct. Oh, it does not help that the lymphatic vessels are in here as well. Bile ductules, what's your third one? We might just be calling them triads, that's fine. Maybe it's the lymphatics that are the problem. So there's this guy, that should be the artery, that should be the vein. I think these are actually the bile ductules, they're just small, and we're not always seeing the lumen. Yeah, we're just calling it a triad. They are not distinct enough to distinguish the 3. So just be aware that those are the structures that are there. You're not going to be able to identify each one individually. Okay.
Okay.
Good question. All right, were there any other slide questions?
No.
Okay, let's look at the other thing then. Okay, I'll go in and point out esophagus, the small intestine, appendix. Okay, the appendix, yes, is also the appendix vermiform. That's just another name for it. Okay, we'll look at for these other guys. Okay, let me go into it and then you prompt me because now I can't pop back and forth. So many tabs. Come on, man. Jesus. Okay, so digestive. So everything should be findable on here. You shouldn't have to go into any other things. Let's tackle esophagus first. So the esophagus got its own thingy. And basically, I don't know why they give you this view because you can't see anything on this view. This is everything in front of the esophagus, other than being able to like see it way down here. But if you go in here, we can see the esophagus running. It runs right behind the trachea, and then and then it runs through the diaphragm, kind of right next to the blood vessels, and then here it is inserting into the stomach. So the portion of the esophagus running through the thorax is the thoracic part. So if you click on that, it should not have highlighted. That's great. Once it goes past the diaphragm, it's in the abdomen. So then the abdominal part, apparently we disagree on this, but the abdominal part is going to be below the diaphragm.
So the lowest part. Okay.
Yeah, because it's the part in the abdomen. It's possible that this is like that because the positioning of the diaphragm here is different than it was in real life. I mean, certainly it's going to be, there's not very much esophagus in the abdomen. Most of it is in the thorax and the neck. But this is all we have. This is all they gave me. So, wanted to give you something.
And the upper esophageal sphincter.
Oh yeah, so if we want to see the upper esophageal sphincter, then we go to the oral cavity. I don't know that it's necessarily labeled, but if you go over here, see how that's esophagus and that's laryngopharynx? So the upper esophageal sphincter is right in here. can't really see it, but we know that it's where the esophagus starts. So it's going to be right in here. That makes sense. It's not going to be anything special or easy to see because it's just a slight thickening of the smooth muscle, but it's an important structure since it, you know, controls the opening of the esophagus. So no, they didn't specifically point it out, but it's right here.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Abdominal cavity. Okay, what was the?
The jejunum for the small intestine.
Okay, so
there's a picture of like the mid-sagittal, and then it shows it's like highlighted. I don't know if that's the one that you're gonna use.
Okay. So basically, it doesn't do like a great job of distinguishing it. But we know that the duodenum is just this short little bit. So all the small intestine we can see up here, this is jejunum. And then everything we can see down here is ileum. And when we look at it with that removed, so see, this is duodenum right here. The jejunum started right here and it squiggled all back and forth here. And then we know that the ileum ends right here because this is the cecum. So the ileum ended here and it was all the lower part. So basically if it's the, you know, the superior half, we're calling jejunum, the inferior half, we're calling ileum.
Okay. And then the ileocecal, I don't know how to say it, the valve?
Yeah, it has like a bunch of names. Valve, sphincter, junction, it's all the same thing.
Okay.
This one is calling it junction because we're not looking at like the detail of it. We're just looking at where the ileum is going into the cecum. So they're not calling it the valve, I think, or the sphincter, I think, because we're looking at it from the outside. And the valve or sphincter part is on the inside.
Okay.
I think that's their logic there. But yeah, if you see ileocecal, it's all referring to the same thing.
And then for the large intestine, the anus, there's a hostra, but the only one I can find was an X-ray.
Okay. I think. So the anus doesn't, okay. So the haustra and tinea that I have on there, it's not for the anus specifically. Those are just the characteristics for the whole large intestine. So they're not on the anus, they're actually on everything else. So we talked about it in lecture today. So if you just look at, so like see how the tinea, how they highlighted along the entire portion that they're showing? Because it's not for the anus, it's for the rest of the large intestine. And then the haustra, I don't know if they actually show it, but if you look at, let's see. So they're not showing it that great, but anything looking pouch-like on this stuff is the haustra. Unfortunately, in this dissection, it doesn't show up well, probably because a lot of that is lost post-mortem because it requires the pressure, or not the pressure, the tension of the tinea to maintain it. So I suspect that that's why we're not seeing it and why they didn't bother to actually show it. Yeah, that's why it's not on there. But yeah, those weren't meant to be part of the anus. Those were just meant to be features of the small or of the large intestine that you're identifying.
Okay. And then the accessory pancreatic duct. I found the
Sorry.
pancreatic duct, but not, I don't know exactly
Oh,
the
okay.
accessory.
I was pretty sure that I saw it, but now I can't remember if it was actually labeled. Yeah, so there is it. That's annoying. Yeah, just take that one off. It's not important. I thought it was on there, but clearly I was just looking at too many diagrams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. For the peritoneal structures,
Mm-hmm.
is it the mesentery of the small intestine, or?
Oh, yeah, that's, yeah, mesentery and mesentery of the small intestine are same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, so the mesocolon, so like the reason why we've got transverse mesocolon, okay, so the mesocolon is all of what suspends the colon, like all of the large intestine, but then it gets divided into areas based on the part of the colon, right? So since we have an ascending colon and a transverse colon and a descending colon, we're going to have an ascending mesocolon, transverse mesocolon, descending. So it's just a subsection of the total mesocolon. Does that make sense? So yeah, if it says mesocolon, it's part of the mesocolon. This is just the specific part for the transverse colon. And even though they don't necessarily label them on the other ones, when we go back to the abdominal, we go back to the abdominal cavity, we can see some of this stuff too, right? So, you know, yeah, mesentery, the mesentery is specifically of the small intestine, so that does cover all of it. Like here's the transverse colon. So this part here, this is the stomach up here. So this part right here would be the transverse mesocolon, even though they didn't label it. And then, the rest of it, the mesocolon, we can't really see it because it's behind this stuff as it's laying, because it's between them and the body wall. So it's there, but we would have to actually like pick up the intestine to see it connecting to the body wall. And that's why they kind of give us this weird diagram, because it's it's not a diagram, it's a person sliced in half, because it's the way that they can kind of show it a little bit more. And for some reason, the transverse is the only part they're showing. I think mostly because as a mid-sagittal cut, the other two aren't there. You know, the transverse colon is the only part of the colon present in a mid-sagittal cut, because the other two are to the right and the left of it. So this is the only mesocolon that they actually have, because if you, this is why I give you guys a lot of pictures of this too, because it's so hard to picture. Because like if you look, can you, well, okay, that's not big enough to be useful. Well, anyway, if you look at these pictures of it, like there's mesocolon for the whole colon, ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. And there's even this little mesoappendix right here, connecting the appendix to the cecum and the ileum. It's just this stuff isn't going to show up well if you're looking at somebody, you know, if you're looking at it sitting there. So that's why that's the only part we have labeled.
Okay. I think that was it for my
Is that all of it? Okay. Anybody else that's on here have any questions about this stuff? If not, you can always email me. We can tackle it on over the
Monday.
weekend by email, or we can talk about it next week. We are set to review the digestive system on Monday, so we can also go back over any lab stuff anybody has questions about as well. And I'll send you guys an announcement when I figure out what time I can finish up your metabolism lecture.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
Okay, I think we're good for now. Thanks for coming.
Okay,
I
thank
will
you.
see you all soon.
Okay.